What's up, everybody? Broken City Artist Podcast. Adam Watts here and
Mike Jackson.
Mike Jackson over there. We both have basses.
It's a bass day. Yours is louder than mine.
That's true. I win. Podcast over. See you guys later. So, two things just came up that you were. You brought up two different subjects that like kind of fascinated me, and I wanted to like press record really fast. One was kind of how you can, on a gut instinct level, recognize authenticity, especially like relative to comedians and to actors. And then the other one was, what did you just say about the 80s with music?
Oh, yeah, I was just mentioning how it seems like the 80s could be wrapped up with anything that anyone could come up with was come up with. Just the things that you would do, like you gravitate to, like, oh, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and there's like a dozen songs right in that era that are iconic and will never be written again. Like, okay, we can't use that.
Or if we use it, we're going to be copying it.
Yeah,
stealing.
It's something just really simple, just like what was it? That's fifth. It's just the simplest concept that a junior high kid could come up with. Like me, I wrote this, and then all of a sudden it's a U2 song.
Right.
I Will Follow, and it's iconic, and it's just you play that, and just automatically in Iron Maiden.
Well, dude, when you said that, I was like, wait, is that true? And then I went to the 90s to like trouble check it.
We did like the
Oh yeah.
Right, it's just the same type of thing. Like all these patterns.
And that's just like
patterns.
one tiny little snapshot. But when you said that, I was like, okay. So let's go to the 90s and see if that treble checks. And instantly in my head, I was like, everything in the 90s was a reference to something in the decades that came before it, but that came in kind of a new package. But in the 80s, there's lots of fresh new things that were really rooted in like the technological advances, like digital recording, synthesizers, drum machines, crazy reverbs that weren't actually in the 70s there were some reverb units and stuff and echo units, but the best reverbs were the ones in the 50s and 60s that were like actually reverb chambers with a speaker on one end and a microphone on the other.
The plate reverbs.
Or the plate reverbs or spring reverbs that were in amps.
Right.
And the 80s was like, everybody was like, holy crap, we can like digitally create reverbs, we can digitally create synthesized sounds that previous to that were only like this Moog right here, actually electronics creating the sound,
right.
You know, like different resistors and capacitors and transformers and stuff. So the 80s had this like huge, and it's funny because we were listening to some 80s stuff. Gannon was talking about that band XTC, and he was like, you gotta hear this song, you gotta hear that song. And the songs that we had played back to back were, one was recorded in the 80s and one was recorded in the 70s, and the one in the 70s was clearly sonically superior. Like way more punchy, way more like fat sounding, and the one in the 80s had like the appearance of fat and the appearance of size, but it was actually like literally if you just like looked at it at the same volume level in the speakers, like everything was like smaller yet more hypey, but not as visceral as the 70s stuff. Yet people, I think, were so blinded by what they could do that they weren't even referencing.
The pendulum swung hard.
Yeah,
and then it took a while for it to come back. But yeah,
I have to say it's beyond taste too. It's not like,
well, there's natural compression from like the old tape machines.
Yeah.
Of the 70s. I still like one of my favorite albums of all time is Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, and you just listen to that and it's so fat.
So fat.
Yeah, and it just. Ugh.
I think people had gotten away from not only the tape compression, but also like the extra harmonic content you get when you're using like non-digital gear, like when you're using transformers and things are going through tubes and then they're hitting tape.
Oh, that was another thing in the 80s is so many guitar players were going direct. Like just bypass, like straight into the mixer and throw the effects on it.
That was when guitar players had like 24 space racks in order to get like one chorus sound.
And then no speakers?
Yeah.
just straight through the veins.
Yeah.
But it just pops into mind, and it wasn't just like the mainstream stuff, but it was bands like Yes. Like I remember Trevor Rabin had that total direct sound.
Mm-hmm.
Not on every album, but on a few albums there. It's crazy. Like
but when you think about it, since the 80s, like a lot of new stuff happened in the 80s. Like quite a bit of it sounds really dated now, but the 80s are actually coming back in a new form more than ever, you know, like with pop artists. But after the 80s, it seemed like, you know, Nirvana came out, but they were like this blend of the 70s turning to 80s punk rock. You know, Kurt Cobain loved the Pixies, but then there was that sort of Led Zeppelin attitude that it had with riffs and stuff, and like a little bit of the Beatles and some of his progressions.
I think that punk element was always there. It just kind of oscillated in popularity.
For sure.
And then definitely peaked during the Nirvana era of its, I guess, its commercial success, so to speak. Bastardized, but still.
The pendulum swung from a very, what I would refer to as like a very aspirational oriented, all about money, fame, sex, drugs, and rock and roll of glam rock and like 80s metal, hair metal. And people are like, I want authenticity and rawness. And Kurt Cobain was there, right place, right time, right artist.
You know what you're hitting on right now?
What?
That's my favorite topic. It's just the topic of expression. And that Nirvana, or just punk in general, is expression without being limited by your prowess, your ability.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
So it's pure expression with just, this is what I have to work with. This is my situation in life, whether it be financial or whatever. This is my gear, and this is what I know how to do. And you spend, and this isn't thought out, but this subconsciously is what happened. What's happening is it's your expression, it's your voice. Whereas those metal bands, I mean, those guys could shred. Listen to any of that stuff, and they were like technical wizards.
They were also older.
The
pop star of 1987 looked like, if you go back and look at like the guys in like White Snake and Winger,
they're all from like
they're like
Purple.
Yeah, they're like late 30s, 40s. It's like the opposite of today, where it's like, oh my gosh, you're almost 30.
Well, you could hear the hours and hours in their technique. Like they had sat there like learning their scales and arpeggios, and then it comes out in the way they play. Not saying that can't be expressive either, but it was such a deluge of chops and virtuosity that we lost something. We lost communication. We lost
the rawness of an emotion coming straight through the instrument.
Yeah, it became about almost showboating.
Yeah.
To the point where even now, like me personally, I hear a guitar solo coming up and I tune out. You know, it sounds like noodling. Like, look what I practiced.
Where are you hearing these guitar solos? Old guitar solos?
No. Maybe just like some retro station somewhere, and I just tune out. I can't do it.
Unless it's Hotel California. Do you have what happens when you hear that?
See, there's a song I don't think I ever need to hear again. Great song. But
it's hard to deny.
And I just heard it the other day. And I think I actually made that comment to my wife. Like I never need to hear this song again.
It's like tattooed on your brain.
It's cool. I got it.
I still love it. I heard it the other day. It was another example of old school classic recording. I know I'm kind of changing subjects again, but it came on in this really echoey restaurant filled with bricks. Shout out to Burger Parlor in Fullerton, best burgers on the planet. But the place is like really noisy and super tall ceilings, brick everywhere. And Hotel California came on, and it was like all of a sudden the drums were like thumping, and it sounded better than a lot of the other stuff that was going on. But the plodding nature of the drumming on that is hilarious. Like it's like a good drum track, but it's just like it's like so caveman. But yeah, that something about that song, man.
No, it's a great song.
I don't know
Nothing
where I was
against the
going with
Eagles.
that, but-
Nothing against. I think it's just what
But
society has done to that song. It's just made it like, okay, enough.
But to get back to what you were saying though, like the rawness factor of technical proficiency, and like the more you learn, the harder it gets to have like discipline with it. Basically, right? Like the more
You want
the
to
more
use your bag of
chops,
tricks.
yeah, the more chops
Sure.
you have, the more you're like, well, check out my chops, as
we-
opposed to what are these tools I have to express this simple thing. Like to hear somebody who can shred on bass just decide to.
Yeah, I think it's the same. We've had this discussion about money and just
Yeah.
financial success. That it becomes a shortcut to reach whatever goal you're trying to reach. That it's somebody who has money has opportunities open to them that someone who does not have. And I think you can. That's tantamount to you have the skill set to do certain things, and now you can use that to your advantage. But it's the discipline that makes the difference. It's tastefulness. Like, how do you define that? You can't define it. It's just like, I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. It's sort of that. It's that.
That was like a senator's definition.
Yeah. All you.
Yes, but what's crazy about that is you find out. I've heard this said about money is that you find out who somebody really is when they become rich. So they're guys that like act nice, and then the second they become rich, all of a sudden they're jerk. Like there's a video on YouTube. I think it seems legit real, but basically they tricked a group of. They look like they're in their early 20s. A group of friends got together and tricked this guy into thinking he had just won the lottery, like millions of dollars. And he opens this envelope and he's like, I won. And then he literally goes around the room and starts to berate everybody. I'm never going to talk to you again. Like goes around and it's just a total. Like
I'd
everybody,
wait at least a week to do that.
right? It was insane. Like the guy became who he really was because he's like, I'm rich. It gives you the ability, just like you said, with like technical ability. You find out how maybe distasteful a musician can be, and ego focused and like flashy and all about like, look at me, look what I can do. When you give them technique, which is like musical money, and then and then if you make somebody rich, you find out what they do with it. Do they make their dreams come true, their family's dreams and friends' dreams come true? Do they start a foundation, or do they just like shut themselves off and try to make more money and feed the sort of selfish? That's a crazy thing to think about. Just like, well, there's been lots of movies made about it. Brewster's Millions is one of them.
Great movie.
Richard
Great
Pryor.
reference.
Yeah. I don't even remember exactly what that movie was about, but it's really true. I mean, we've been bouncing around a lot of topics in the last few minutes, but that's a powerful one, man, because if you have a lot of chops and then the maturity to know what to do with them, that's really what it's all for in the first place.
Now there's a quote from Mark Knopfler, who's the guitar player for Dire Straits.
Mm-hmm.
This is going way back. But he was some interviewer was basically complimenting him, saying, "Hey, you have such restraint and such a maturity, tasteful approach to everything you do." And he said, "Well, it's because I can't do anything else. There really isn't any restraint. What you're hearing is the extent of my abilities."
That's crazy.
He was very humble about it, and it was funny, like a funny response. But I don't know what point I'm trying to make, but I just thought it was kind of interesting that.
Well, I think that
how we take that in, like how we perceive that. Oh, that's restraint. And a lot of times it's. I mean, you could take a punk band, for example. Is that restraint? Or is that's just the limit of their abilities?
Yeah, and really, what level of ability are we talking about? Because a lot of times, musical ability is sort of looked at almost like sports ability. How high can you jump? How far can you jump? How fast can you go? Basically, where it's perceived as like, oh, he has a lot of technique if he's shredding fast on guitar, can play his scales, if he's going around the drum set with insane speed and accuracy, whatever. But then there's that layer of technique in the arts which has to do with how you do things. And I think Mark Knopfler, maybe whether he was like plain humble or wasn't aware of it, is that it's how he plays a note, not necessarily how fast can he play the notes.
Yeah, it's definitely when I'm in the capacity of being a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I tell my students. It's how we do things that makes it special. Because the notes on the page, anyone can play the notes on the page.
Yeah.
Anyone can learn that lick. Anyone can do this, but how we do it is what gives it its sort of unique stamp.
I think a lot of times there's something about the power of fashion and a sense of nowness can sort of blur how important how things are done are, and you see it more in retrospect. So, for example, like, a good example might be like Adele. Like she's really famous and has songs in the charts, and then there's other artists that are right up there having the same chart position and things like that. Or you might be able to compare apples to oranges, but when you look back, what are we gonna remember and value? It's gonna be the people who approach things with like a real deep sense of how they did it, like a certain sort of grace and care and authenticity. We're back to that first thing we were going to talk about. It's like,
I think why
is Clapton looked at as a great guitar player when he's really technically, there are a lot of guys, I mean, I know a lot of not famous people that can technically outplay Eric Clapton, but how he plays things is, and also the fact that he was a pioneer. But I think it's over and over he's shown that it's how he plays things that's more important than even what he's playing, because he's playing his thing is rooted in the pentatonic scale, but it's how he's doing it.
I think it's his level of maybe kind of going back to the comedian thing, where it's not acting. He's not putting on an act. Like, this is his act.
Oh yeah, talk about that a little bit, because we weren't rolling yet when you were talking about
that. I totally don't want to derail what we were just talking about, so
it's kind of on the same.
But yeah, I was just saying that there's some connection that's made with me personally with certain comedians where I don't feel like it's their act, or that I'm being duped. I tricked you, you laughed at my joke.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that from maybe like 90% of all the comedians that I've been exposed to.
Right.
I tend to be really picky about my what I get enjoyment from. And there's the ones that I do, I try to analyze it. Why is this guy funny to me? Why anything he says is funny.
Yeah.
It's just, or maybe not even funny. It's entertaining and it's interesting, and I want to hear more.
Yeah.
And like one of the guys I'm just like crazy about right now, Bill Burr, and then historically speaking, I'm a big fan of Mitch Hedberg and Stephen Wright, those guys. And Stephen Wright clearly has an act. Like it's his thing, but there's something about...
It's so unique, though. There's nobody like that before.
Yeah, there's something about his personality, and it's... I believe he thinks that is an interesting and possibly humorous point of view when he speaks.
It's natural, yeah. He couldn't fake it.
Right, and then with Bill Burr, it's the same thing. Like, I listen to his podcast, and he's not doing any material on the podcast. It's just he's speaking, and it's completely engaging. And there's it's a commercial for Bill Burr.
I know.
But I try to analyze why is this entertaining to me, and why do I enjoy it? And there's something, especially when you compare, when you have back-to-back comedians. I went to a comedy show a couple weeks ago, and there's 4 comedians there, and 3 of them I was like, eh. There's something about their authenticity, or I felt like it was an act, and that when I laughed, I was responding to the joke that they wrote.
Right.
As opposed to responding to the human that's communicating. Like, I feel like
that's
good comedian is almost interactive, regardless of the size of the venue. That's interactive.
Yeah. And there's there's two things going on. There's like the content, the written joke, which is sort of like the notes on the page, and then there's the performance of that joke. And I think the guys that are the most amazing, there's like a seamless integration between the content of what they're doing and how they're doing it. And like Bill Burr, like I know somebody that likes Bill Burr's podcast more than his stand-up.
I think I fall in that category, for sure.
Which is crazy.
Like Monday can't come soon enough.
Yeah.
It's like, did he upload it yet? Nope.
Totally. And it's like comedy is a it's a lightning rod for, I think, the power of created art that's performed. It's like there's nothing more naked than a comedian on a stage with a microphone, living and dying by what they do and how they do it.
And you got to respect that. Like, even if you don't like the guy or the girl, like you don't like the joke, you got to respect. Like,
it takes a lot of guts.
That is the ultimate, right there. You're on stage by yourself with a microphone and ready to go.
It's like I guess the other thing would be maybe like a one-man show Broadway thing, or a singer-songwriter with a guitar and a vocal.
That's almost not as interactive though. Like if I have, this is the song I'm going to play.
Oh no, comedy is.
It's like, because if you practice the song enough,
you can hide behind it.
Yeah, you could definitely hide behind it.
Dude, and I think what this comes down to is laughter. Because laughter is involuntary, and if you just put your joke out there and did not get laughter, it's like you immediately know it. It's like an instant test for what you're doing.
And then how do you handle that?
Yeah. Whereas we're conditioned to clap even if something isn't that great. It's like you don't. The performer feels it, the audience feels it, but it's not as drastic as like, did they laugh or not?
Right.
Because that's just like, dude, laughter is the weirdest thing in the world. You're laughing right now.
Yep.
What is it?
I'm just picturing myself up on stage. Failing.
That's funny. You think like I have I have an 8-month-old son. What the heck am I saying? I have an 8-month-old son, and he laughs. He either does or he doesn't. There's no choice involved. There's no, as far as I know, there's no like he's doing me a favor by laughing. If I do the right,
as far as you know,
he could be.
He's got some empathy.
He could be on some whole whole other plane as a human being. But yeah, there's no courtesy laugh in a kid, and the same goes for. I think people kind of don't want to laugh at some comedians. Like they're sort of like. Make me laugh.
I feel that. That's the whole duped thing. Like I feel like I'm being duped. And then you could apply it to music too. When I hear a pop song that's definitely like pop genre, like me, give me money.
Yeah.
You know. And if I even, just fraction of me likes it.
You resent them?
Yeah. That's not resent. It's like I just resist it. And like I need to hear more.
Mm-hmm.
I need to do some research before I decide that I like this. And then some of it I'm okay with. Like there's stuff out there where I'm like, I really like this stuff. I think it's genuinely cool. It just happens to be in a pop genre, as opposed to someone who's a little bit more deliberate with making their way. You know what I mean? Like this is how I make my way.
Making your way in the world today. Hey, so check this out. On that exact subject, tell me if you've ever felt this. There have been times when I've heard like pop music, and I don't have like a real like. I don't care what kind of music it is. Like I don't have like I don't like pop or I only like pop. Like whatever. Right. It's more back to that authenticity thing. If it feels authentic, it doesn't matter what style it is. It's like I dig it. Hip hop, rock, pop, classical, whatever, jazz. But there are times in pop music where I feel like I'm struck with the feeling that I'm being. I want to make sure I express this right, but with the feeling that I'm being manipulated, and that they're using the power of music out of context, like where I'm like being moved in this way that's making me feel an emotion that's like, yeah, man, life is worth living. It's good, and then I check in with the lyric, and it's like, party, 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 get laid, do drugs, or what, like just some sort of message that's like clearly like not what the music seems to be saying on like a very fundamental level. And I feel like they're like cheating me, like they're like manipulating me into like loving this song that really is more about appealing to like the high life or something.
You know, I had this almost exact conversation with my wife earlier in the week. We were talking about hip hop and rap came up, and I think what we got to the point where it was music for party time, like club vibe.
Yeah.
Where you're there to have fun, and you need some sort of groove happening.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, clearly for entertainment purposes. Yeah, I don't put that in the same category as someone's trying to speak to me on a deep level, and that I'm okay with that. Like, I don't think having rules for what is art or what is music, or they have to be the same thing. Can there be music without art? And what's the purpose of this thing that I'm listening to?
Yeah.
So I think making sure that we hear things in context, like this
Totally.
is clearly for the dance floor, and shake your booty, party, party.
Yeah, to say that one is right and wrong is like totally not. It's like invalid. Like, I agree with you.
Right.
Like, I think like not all food has to be nutritious. Like, just like some food is dessert.
Right.
You couldn't live off of it.
I think the problem is that the dessert doesn't tell you. The dessert doesn't walk up and get in your face and say, I'm full of protein and nutrients. And I think that's where I have a problem with, is that this
right.
entertainment shake your booty is telling me they're an artist. And
Well,
it's
society
hard.
is telling you, like, if you're an artist, the brass ring is entertainment. Like, that's where
Yeah.
you're going to make your money. That's where you're going to get fame. That's where you're going to get validation. And, this, we're not the only people thinking this stuff, but, like, it definitely makes me feel, I don't know, like, man, what would happen, for example, here's an idealistic, utopian, weird thought, but like, what would happen if we just if we had the like Men in Black little gun, and we could just like just shoot the world and wipe everybody clean, everybody's memory clean, and they're just sitting there now like with a blank artistic slate, and you put on the top 10 of iTunes, or you just put like 10 songs out, and one song that was great in every style, and like start it over. Like, what music would become popular? Would it still,
Right.
10 years from now, would it go to pop music?
Yeah.
Or would it be kind of split a little bit more, with like a lot more people liking jazz, a lot more people liking classical?
It's sort of like your am I allowed to talk about your upcoming book? 'Cause I just did.
Yeah, actually, we have to go to part 2 on this camera, so we'll come back and talk about that.
I was just saying, you mentioned something about that in your book as far as taste, the types of different taste, like and all of these almost immeasurable set of nuances and variables of what draws us to something. Like, is it a trend? Did my mom like it? Do my friends like it? Is there some sort of like retro movement involved where it's cool now to like this stuff, or what is pure taste, and getting down to that.
Yeah,
it's fascinating, because I mean you can't possibly like something in a complete total vacuum. You have to accept that there's things like when we hear, especially, I think it depends on how old you are too. When I hear a certain sound, it takes me back, like I can picture my childhood listening to Foghat records, or like that. Oh man, that's like, and it takes me there. It's like, that's so cool and hip that someone made a historical choice, or a historical like sort of nod. Like, I'm going to use this because of what it represents.
Right.
I mean, God, there's things like that all around us. Even with I don't know why this popped in my head, but like the swastika, we see that. And it's not just a bunch of straight lines in some particular order. It represents evil and hatred and ignorance.
Yeah.
And it's just like you can't get around that. And I think music is the same way. You hear an old Moog synth, or you hear. I just did my foot pedal. My Tom Sawyer foot pedal.
Yeah, that's like the logo for hate, in a way, the swastika. Yeah. And art gets like, especially art that reaches a certain point of like prominence, I guess, in history, becomes a part of the alphabet of the art that comes after it. So like, certain like pentatonic riffs on a super heavy Marshall guitar are gonna like bring you back to the most famous versions of that, whether it's Rage Against the Machine, or it goes back to Led Zeppelin before that, and there's always an origin, but it becomes a part of our language of art. It's like, it's a fascinating thing, the way taste works, because the book that Mike is referring to is something that I started writing about a year ago, that I'm calling like a holistic approach to the arts, like the way to bring the entire self to what you do, your psychology, your spirituality, your level of conceptual thought, like philosophy, and then your physiology, just like your bodily sort of relationship to your instrument and technique and stuff. So it's been a year in the making, and that's what Broken City Artists kind of was rooted in, and so the beginnings of this podcast and Mike and I coming back together and stuff was sort of the culmination of me kind of like writing all these ideas down about the bumps and bruises that I've gotten throughout my creative life, and learning from them, and then just a lot of self-exploration and reflection about what art means to me, what art is historically, and like where it all comes from, and what the purpose of it is, and how do we as artists approach what we do in a way that like actually can affect not only our own lives but the lives of others. And it's this really intricate process, and I think I wish I could go back in a time machine to the me of 15 years ago.
Erase all those tapes.
Erase all those tapes. Well, what I wish I could do is I think the right piece of information, or the right way of thinking at the right time, you can shave off 5 years of pain and struggle by just the right kind of perspective, and changing your philosophical outlook on something. It's happened to me, and I see you do it all the time. When you were teaching me as a young drummer, and you teach all the time, you teach through analogy a lot, and I think like the power of an analogy to teach the arts is just like one of many tools that you can use to actually really get yourself progressing faster and in the right direction. Like your description of the way you want a crescendo to sound is like a really good example of shifting the way you think and having that affect what you actually do on a drum, for example. It's like, remember the one I'm talking about? The curtain, or the...
Yeah.
Yeah, so, explain that for the kids at home.
It won't make any sense if you're not watching this, but basically if music were a visual art, if it were, what would a crescendo look like?
Yeah.
It would be either black, like pitch black to bright white, or bright white to pitch black, and whatever rate or pace that you desire. So I try to create. It's kind of silly, and the kids always laugh when I do it. But I said basically, you need to create the soundtrack to this. What does that sound like?
If you're just listening, he basically took a hidden finger behind his hand and made it go around the hand to be like a finger you can see.
So is that jot, or is that jot?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
And the same thing, is it jot, or is it
Yeah.
It's
almost like somebody running away in the fog.
Right, and we could talk hours about the technique required to truly start something at inaudible and to bring it to some sort of punctuation point. And then we could talk about the opposite, like taking something that's omnipresent and having it disappear into the blackness, like aurally. And there's a lot of like sophisticated technique and touch on the drum to make that happen, or any instrument, regardless. But I found that if the kids are in the right headspace, that the technique sort of just follows. Like they just, did it sound the way it was supposed to sound? No. Well, then keep attacking it until you've reached the desired effect, the desired sound. And then we also talk about that the crescendo or decrescendo could be anything. It doesn't have to be a buzz roll. It doesn't have to be 8th notes or 16th notes. Right. So then we get on an interesting philosophical discussion about what is actually written on the paper, like the rudiment, the lick, the note value is the least important thing.
Yeah.
What's important is that we took something that was omnipresent and made it go away, or we take something that's non-existent and we bring it to life.
So it's about intent.
Right. So it could be or it could be or it could be it's from a composer standpoint, regardless of what the medium is. It's the intent that's the important thing.
Right. Each of those versions that you just sort of mouthed have a different, are speaking a different emotional language in whatever context they're in. Has a totally different kind of feeling to it than so like.
But the big picture is the same. But yes, it's different feel. But the big picture is that something wasn't there, and then all of a sudden it's there.
Yeah, we were talking about this.
Could be like a directorial. Like if you're shooting a movie, how does the director choose to implement the vision of the screenplay? That's in the style. So is it buzz rolls, is it 8th notes? You can kind of mesh those two ideas together. But the fact is, a new character is introduced. That's the big picture. Right.
And what's funny is you used the exact analogy I was just about to throw out, which Gannon and I touched on the last episode, which is this concept of f-stop with photography. We're using it relative to lyrics. Like, when you have like a low f-stop on a camera, like a 1.2 or something, like your focal depth can be like just an inch or two or something, depending on how far you are from the camera. But so I'm deciding, like, if I'm shooting your picture here, that your face is in focus and the background's out of focus. So what we were talking about is that, like, lyrically you can use metaphor to bring one word or one line in your song forward and obvious and in focus, and through metaphor you can bring other lyrics out of focus, so that then your ear goes to the music, or your ear goes to the sonics and away from the lyric. And the same goes for what you just said. It's almost like whether or not you use pulling focus is like going from a super soft buzz roll to a loud 30-second note roll or something, would be like pulling focus on a sound. And you're getting this sense that like I think something I said earlier while we were talking was just like somebody running towards you in the fog.
Yeah.
It's like or somebody running away from you.
I don't know, I always picture Looney Tunes. Like the...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so the main idea is just to be able to, some of the things I've been fascinated with as I've been writing this book and we've been coming up with this approach, it's really not meant to be just a book, but more, something that we want to share with people as to bring, to help bring the focus always back to truth and authenticity with the things that we create as artists, no matter what kind of art or what kind of artist, whether it is entertainment or whether it's really meaningful. And that you can use things like you said, what would this sound look like? That's an immediate paradigm shift in the way you think about what you're doing, which can really take you to a new level like that. Whereas if you're only thinking about sound all the time, you might paint yourself into a corner or get kind of stuck.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked for this band director years and years ago, like over 20 years ago, and he was far from a brilliant mind, but he said something that stuck with me like forever.
Don't name any names, though.
I'm not naming any names. No one will ever know. But he said, and he kind of said it out of ignorance, but at the same time, it changed the way I think about things. But he said, this needs to sound like, this movement needs to sound like high noon, and this movement needs to sound like midnight. And it's just like, I was young, like 19, 20, and I just sat on that, and like, how do I make percussion like no melodic content, like it's just noises? How do I make that sound like high noon, and how do I make something sound like midnight? And it was this huge challenge.
Wow.
And I recall it, I reflect upon that as being a success. Like what I wrote, I feel like that's high noon and that's midnight. I can't remember what it sounded like. I don't remember like any of the specifics, but I just remember feeling like I got it. I got this. And then when you have that thought process and that level of depth when you approach something, I think people hear it. I think people hear it and say, "Oh, it's different." They could not like it, like,
yeah,
that's cool. But
right.
But mostly, I think people will hear the depth that you put into something. I know we're jumping around subjects, but we were talking about the comedians and the music and all that. It kind of touches on the level of depth. When you hear a joke, and you're talking about, okay, so there's the joke that's on the page, then there's the delivery, and that's what brings it to life.
Right.
I think that the subtlety and the thing that might not be readily apparent is that your mind, at least my mind, takes me to what would cause somebody to even think that way. How did that joke come to life? Where did that joke come from? What sort of mental path was that person on where their mind went there and they thought to even discuss such a subject? And I think I hear the same thing in music.
Yeah.
When I hear composition or the way things are laid out, and ultimately if it's a singer-songwriter, or not necessarily a singer-songwriter, but a musician that's also the composer.
Yeah.
There's a life there that's unique. At least the perception is unique. Like if I'm watching performers and I know they wrote that song, there's a perception that's already unique and has a level of depth that you can't get if I'm watching a performer that's performing somebody else's song. That doesn't mean one's better than the other, but the perception's different. Yeah.
And that just goes to show that there's, in an art like the singer-songwriter, there's it's almost like a few layers of different art forms, that's like there's lyrics, there's music, there's singing, and then there's performance of all those things.
And it's just all communication.
It's all communication, but I think you could go Google any famous song you want and find a zillion covers of it, and you're going to realize you're going to find one that for you is the definitive version, and it may not be the one who wrote it,
right.
But that's where taste comes in again, because
Yeah, and I think it's important to stress it doesn't mean one's better than the other. It's just your perception of it is different. Like if you have any sort of capacity for depth and sophistication, your perception's different. If you have the information, then the perception's different. Now it might not be different if you don't know.
I think that'd be the great test, and I would say though that it's possible for somebody to write the song that's a great song and perform it solid but not great, and for somebody else to take that same song and connect to it on a deeper level as a performer than the one who wrote it. And I mean that I think one of the most famous examples of that, which
Hallelujah.
Oh, that's a great one.
Yeah.
I was going to go somewhere else, like to Carole King or something.
Okay.
Somebody who is a great songwriter with a quirky voice, who's written songs that like Aretha Franklin has sung. But
Right.
Hallelujah is a great example because
Yeah.
Leonard Cohen wrote Hallelujah, and his version is totally different, lower plotting, not as good, like a technically good singer, and it isn't
Right.
soar.
Right.
And then you have Jeff Buckley's version,
Yeah.
or
you could
Rufus
do
Wainwright's version, or
Bob Dylan and Adele. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Adele does not sing that like she's distanced from it.
right. She brought a whole different emotional
Right.
perspective to that song. What's the song called? Feel
Make
My
You
Love.
Feel My Love,
Make
yeah.
You Feel My Love.
But with that said, if you listen to the Dylan version, knowing that he wrote it, the way you take it in is different. I think
Totally.
that's what I'm trying to say. Like, and the Leonard Cohen, you know that okay, this is something that this guy, like, this didn't exist before he picked up the guitar.
And that's really the thing, man, is like taking something, no matter how an audience experiences it later, then you're dealing with taste and personal perspective and stuff. But like that process of going from taking something from an internal experience that's invisible and making it something that somebody else's senses can experience, that is now whether it's an inanimate object or a performance that comes out and is now just floating away in the wind, that's like that's what the arts are, and that's why it's such an amazing paradigm to have as human beings. It's like transcends all boundaries, like language boundaries, cultural boundaries. It's like we all speak the language of the arts in one way or another, even when otherwise it might be hard to communicate or something. I don't know, it's a pretty amazing thing what art is when you really sit there and think about it and zone out on the fact that like you can.
It's almost as if the art has to be defined by the person creating it, and whether or not it's art.
Yeah.
That the intent's there, so it really doesn't matter how you take it in. It doesn't matter how the masses perceive it. It matters like where did it come from? What's its origin? What was the intent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's too like, to wrap your head around it. I mean, which is kind of what your book is about. It's like
right.
It's taking something that maybe shouldn't be defined, like when you get to the end result, but at the same time, the thing I love about your book and what I've read of it so far is that it takes a nurturing approach. Mm-hmm. That what do we do with future artists, or that people that have that potential in them? How do they harness that? How do they stay on the path to be mentally healthy in a place where they can create true, authentic, genuine expression, regardless of media? I think that's what's being said. That's my perception anyway. That's what's being said in your manuscript so far, is that there's a psychological part of being an artist that's rarely talked about. We see the results of it all the time.
Oh yeah.
This guy killed himself. This guy took too many pills, and this, but we don't really talk about what's happening with the artist or the potential artist in context with them still being around, them still experiencing that struggle.
Yeah. I mean,
we don't get to him soon enough. Is basically it. It's like it's all like nobody could talk Kurt Cobain out of what he was going to do. He was going to do what he was going to do, and there's no way to get to him at that point. Unreachable.
And side note, now there's a new documentary that's all like conspiracy oriented, that he didn't kill himself, but we won't even go there. But I just watched the Amy Winehouse documentary. Well, first of all, thanks for saying that about what I've written so far. But there is a lot of I don't know, what was the word you used? It wasn't empathy, but like I feel for artists, and being one, I know the struggles that you can go through as an artist. When you feel like you need to express yourself through some artistic medium, almost as a survival mechanism in life, and that art has done that for you, and you seek to do it not only for yourself, but because you want to communicate with the world. And I have a lot of empathy for what artists go through, because I've had my own like very private struggles with bumps and bruises, like I said earlier, of being an artist and trying to get something that's on the inside out into the world, and feeling like the flaws are going to get in the way. And that if I was just like that much of a different person, maybe I would have chosen drugs and to soothe that pain that I felt, or just who knows, if I would have had fame in an area where I was weak as psychologically, maybe it would have destroyed me. I mean, that's why I brought up the Amy Winehouse documentary, because in watching it earlier in her career, before she was the person that I think the world knew, who was very drawn out. You could tell. I mean, the difference between her pre-drugs and after drugs. And in the documentary, it shows that she was kind of messing with drugs a lot, like throughout her career. But I think when she hit the hard stuff, she just got really skinny and acted different on stage. But before she hit that point, somebody asked her, like, what's your goal, or something like that. Like, do you want to be famous and whatever? She's like, well, I'm not making the kind of music that's ever going to get famous. I just kind of want to be left alone to make my art. But if I did get famous, I think it would destroy me. She said that in an interview. And then she got famous, and it could be argued that that's part of what destroyed her. I mean, you could say that's not what destroyed her. It was the drugs, or it was the relationships she was in, or whatever. But
I think it's the lack of it's the inaccurate expectations, and it's the lack of preparation.
They were frailties.
That destroyed her. And it sucks to say it, because it's a life, but it's like she destroyed herself. Nothing destroyed her. And
well,
go on.
Okay, throw that argument back at me after this, because I think in a lot of these cases, there's two sides of it. There's nature and nurture. So if you're prone to addiction genetically, let's say, and you might have different beliefs systems about what is nature and what is nurture. Like, is alcoholism run in families, or does it become a way? But like, there's some really strong evidence to support that addiction is really tied to trauma, more so than it's tied to something like a genetic disposition. But there could be genetic factors in it. But she had a very her dad left when she was young, and all the people around her talk about how that affected her. Like, he wasn't around, and then at a certain point, maybe she was a little under 10 years old or something, or maybe she was 11 or 12, her dad left for good, and she talks about what that felt like. She's like, I felt like all of a sudden I had permission to do whatever I want, say whatever I want. Like, she just said screw it mentally, because her dad left. And I think when you look at her life, you can sort of trace back that it's like the fuse is lit in her childhood due to her dad leaving. And then the bomb finally went off when she made a bunch of choices which are so complicated you can't even really unpack, but she ended up dying young. So I don't even know what your argument was, but she did do it. Oh, and she did it to herself. Like, those were choices, but when you're a kid, it's not a choice.
Yeah, well, I mean, barring
trauma,
mental illness, there's things that can be done, and you can't reach everybody. That's impossible. But there's things that can be done, just as part of the curriculum of the arts.
For sure.
That this can be talked about, and obviously that's the heaviest it can get is your life, your existence. That's on the far end. But even simple things, it's just to quote a friend, analysis paralysis. Sitting there just overthinking something, and should I do this? Should I not do that? And does it need to be this? Oh, what are people going to think about it? And just, like, all those battles that that some of us, and I've certainly been there, too many times.
I get there at the end of every album I make.
Yeah, it's like when are you going to be? And maybe we should end the podcast with this. Vulnerable.
Yeah.
Let it be vulnerable. Whatever you're doing, that's okay. I mean, I think that just needs to be talked about from square one. Like, you know, you're in art class, whether it's painting or playing guitar or whatever, that if there's any talk of creating and actually being an artist, or expressing yourself, and maybe that's it. Maybe those comedians that I like are vulnerable.
They are. They're bringing themselves to what they do. They're bringing their truth to what they do. Vulnerability is the ability to express your truth in an honest, open way. Like, and
to be okay with people not liking what you're doing and criticizing it in advance.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I don't want to leave this point, the previous point, without touching on this part of it when we were talking about Amy Winehouse and stuff. But in a way, when you're self-medicating, there's some sort of pain that you're trying to that you're either afraid of or that you don't want to feel. And for her, maybe going on stage was extremely vulnerable and she had to be drunk, or maybe all the things that she went through with her dad. There was a vulnerability that she had, obviously, when her dad left when she was a kid, where she was injured, so she had to cover that up and hide it. So, and I think that's a lot of that psychological part that I've written a lot about in this book, and that I think should be brought to arts education and just thought about in the world of the arts, is just like, if you know somebody that's going through that stuff, be the vulnerable one that goes up to them and reaches out and like doesn't take no for an answer, because you can intervene, not even in an intervention sense. You don't need to necessarily book that event where the family shows up, but be vulnerable with that person. Go, look, I love you. Like, why are you doing this? Oh, get away. Like, that could end up with death. So, like, being vulnerable and being a safe place for somebody to be vulnerable with you can actually change. And obviously, saving a life, like you said, is like the ultimate end. But saving a work of art, like, there are works of art that die inside artists every day because they're not willing to be vulnerable. And that's kind of what you were saying, like, paralysis by analysis. It's like you're basically murdering this little work of art by overanalyzing it and being afraid to be vulnerable, like, which is a little mini tragedy, I think, because I think there's lots of ways that you can hide your vulnerability. You can cover it up with pretending to be somebody you're not. You can cover it up with acting cool, doing the thing that sounds cool. I think it's actually, you said being afraid of being vulnerable. I think it's okay to be afraid. Yeah. Be afraid after you sign it. Like, I have a friend who always says, sign the painting. Oh, right. Even when we're not talking about painting. But it's like, sign the painting. It's off. It's in the record store. It's done. Yeah. People are buying it or they're not buying it. And now you can be afraid, because at least you followed through. You made it happen. And then you can do what you want with that emotion. Totally. And there's a way to be fearful vulnerably. Like, fear and vulnerability aren't opposites. Like, you can be any emotion and add vulnerability. I think vulnerability is just the ability to put it out there and say, I'm afraid, as opposed to like being afraid and then acting like you're not, and then not releasing it, or taking the easy way out and doing something that's not truly you, that's not genuine, doing what you think people want to hear or see. Yeah, so I have a recommendation to end on. We'll do closing comments. There's a book by Seth Godin, Godin. He has a great daily blog. Sort of a marketing expert / awesome lover of arts. Just great guy. Lots of great videos on him on the internet of him speaking and stuff. But he has a book called V is for Vulnerable, and a very foundationally serious philosophical book about artists and being vulnerable, and it just almost in like a children's book kind of way walks through the alphabet, and V is for vulnerable, and every word has like every letter has a word attached to it and like a small piece of advice, and V is like be vulnerable. And it's a great book. You like scream through it in like 20 minutes, but I highly recommend that. You can get it online. Have you seen that one yet?
I have not.
That's great.
I'll check it out.
Yeah. So anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in again. Adam Watts out.
Mike Jackson. Thank you.
See you guys.
Ringing sound, poison rain, don't come around here again. I will cover you, you will feel no pain. Wait for the blue sky again. I did it for the money, babe, did it for the green. Then my luck ran out, lost my sanity. Now I'm here today, wanna testify. Don't do it for the money, babe, 'cause the money's gonna lie.